And the reason why I'm doing part 2 is because I threw 3 questions last time, and we didn't do the third one. So a quick definition, what we were talking about last time, a tithe is a portion, 10% of your income, given as an offering to your local church. Because the custom of tithing is biblical, many Christians and Jews practice it as part of their faith. That was loud and clear. Yeah, let's go to the next one. And this is what I'm talking about. So last time, not that I expect you to remember everything, that's giving me an idea. Take a piece of paper, a pen, and no, we're not gonna do a test. But so we discussed, is tithing an Old Testament practice? Was tithing an obligation, the law? Ooh, that's a good one. Where we got at, because we're gonna see, and the third one is it mentioned in the New Testament? That's where most people get stuck. Why the New Testament doesn't talk as much as the Old Testament? Blah, 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 blah. It does, but not as much, and we're gonna get to that. So that's why I felt like a second part was needed for that. Next slide. So the first tithe given was Abraham. Now I need the scholars here to answer this question. Who came first, Abraham or Moses? Abraham. And who was the law given to? Moses. Hey, you're very good. You read your Bible. So the first person who ever gave, well, recorded in the Bible, whoever gave a tithe was Abraham. So that nothing to do with the law. His grateful heart wanted to give tithing to Melchizedek. Here, look, Melchizedek was a priest. Here, everything I have, I'll give you the 10%, and that's why there's cattle there, because it wasn't money, it was cattle and things. So giving from a grateful heart, that was the motto. Let's continue. And then Jacob, descendant of Abraham, also made a vow to God. Oh, here, I'm gonna give you it's in yellow. Of all that you give me, I will give you 1/10. So again, nothing to do with the law. The law didn't exist by then. And says, here, I'm gonna give. Let's keep whisking through the next one. And then became a law, because these people led the way. And within the law, let's go to the next one. That's a sum up of what the law said, that when you give your tithe, you had to take it to a place of dwelling for his name. Today it's called church. The Levites, people serving God full time, foreigners. It's all in the news, isn't it? And we've been touched and moved by so many foreigners try to come to this country and get a living, escape war, starvation, and we call them refugees. The fatherless, orphans, who's responsible for we may say the government, of course. Somehow, I must be honest, somehow by paying your tax, you give to a number of things. But it's not the government. As Christians, God is asking us to contribute one way or another. And the widows. And the widows there, again, we may think it's a government's responsibility, but in those times especially, an orphan didn't have anything to live by, and a widow was just doomed because she didn't have any source of income.
To clarify, this is the people or things that I go to.
Yes, So Felix asked, just to clarify, is this the things, the law, what the law says the tithe should go into? Yes. And that was very Old Testament, that this list is about 7,000, about 6,000, 7,000 years old. Again, I need the scholars here because I don't want to talk rubbish, especially if I'm being recorded. So about that, but just have a look. Does that make sense today even? Is that something that we would like to give to? And I know many of you give to other causes and things that are not listed there, which is also godly and yeah, and out of generosity. But thank you for your question. So that's why I wrote that. This makes sense to you. That was only a revision, people. Let's go now to the New Testament, what Jesus has to say. Okay, so Jesus is here. I'm gonna read it on my, I don't know why I keep telling me because I have it in front of me. I'm gonna move, if I move, yeah, there you go. So this is the only time that Jesus mentioned, and he even says that he's rebuking those who only tithe and don't do anything else. He says, but woe to you Pharisees, those very, very religious people who absolutely love the law, but lost the heart behind the law. For you tithe mint and rue and every herb. Does anyone tithe that these days? And neglect justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done. So he's not saying, don't do that, but without neglecting the others. So if we're gonna do law, let's be consistent, Jesus was saying, right? Then he says something very similar again. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Ooh, scribes are the ones who actually keep the law and write it down, more than the difference with the religious people. Hi, hypocrites. For you tithe mint, again, mint, and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weighty matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. This you ought to have done without neglecting the others. Oh, who likes Jesus here? It's just his way of, yeah, he just turned the world as he came at that time upside down. Everything that people kept for millennia, centuries and centuries and centuries of doing the same thing. He said, do you even know what you're doing? Now, let me clarify. There's so many interpretations about why he mentioned those herbs and yeah, and no money, for instance. I learned this in history, not in the Bible, but Marco Polo, the traveler who did so much in the modern world just by traveling and exploring things. So one of the most precious things he discovered was spices, right? Does anyone know that? So I'm using my memory because I didn't read again, but he uses spices. Why? Because in those times, the freezer didn't exist. How do you preserve meat? How do you preserve, you know? So that revolutioned the world of his time. So it was, in the Bible says a lot about salt, doesn't it? Salt, and it says you are the salt of the world, how important we are. But again, preservation and a lot, but the herbs made food edible because it wasn't enough. It was to curate meat to you know, otherwise what you had to consume within hours without being spoiled, wasted. Does that make sense? So herbs were important, and and the Pharisees were doing, the right thing, but they neglected justice. They didn't care, they didn't care for that long list that we had before, the widows, the orphans, the people giving the time to God, the foreigners, they couldn't care less. So they forgot what the list was about, but they just made sure. So that's what Jesus said. No one said that you shouldn't do that. You're neglecting the other. Come on now. Is that what you call giving? Now, I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay. One of the most amazing stories about giving is through this man Zacchaeus. Now, I need your help because I'm getting bored of my own voice. So 4 lines, 1, 2, 3. Well, we have 3 groups. You're a group, you're a group, you're a group. So I'm gonna shout out loud. Who was Zacchaeus, this group? Sorry, I put you on the spot. Who did he meet? And what happened next? You had a political bit. It's unfair, actually. Who was Zacchaeus? Tax collector. Popular, unpopular? Unpopular? Honest? No. Very dishonest. Corrupt? Shall we say corrupt? Just to understand the context in these days. Who did he meet? Jesus. And just what happened in that encounter? That's key. That's key to the story. Why we invite? Yeah, Jackie. Oh, sorry, I forget that there are people online. Zacchaeus met Jesus, and he wanted to see him from a tree. You know all the story of the tree, looking because he was small, and then, but Jesus says, "Hey, can I come to your house?" And that brought havoc because people were saying like, "Well, are you about to, like, this is a corrupt man. You shouldn't go to a politician's house. You shouldn't go to someone who is infamous for being corrupt." And then what happened, people? Anyone has any idea in this section of the church? Yes. And yeah, he's saying his life around, his sins are forgiven. He just met the most important person that he could possibly meet. Now, I want to do some, yes, great, Christine.
You say he was corrupt, he was dishonest. Never said that anywhere. It says, no, but they said that she tax collector and rich, and that was really kind of sin in a way because he was collecting taxes for the Romans. But I think even more powerful if we just forget that we don't know, we just know he's a tax collector because he says. It doesn't say if I have recorded anyone, I restore it fourfold. Now, if you recorded everybody, you wouldn't be able to say that because you wouldn't be able to restore it fourfold.
Potentially, yes. So let me just translate the question because.
It doesn't make it less powerful, it makes it even more because it's just saying whoever you want, so we can see everything that's happening.
Okay, I'm gonna just summarize this for people who are listening. Christine was saying, it doesn't. What does he say in the verse? If you read it at home, that he was corrupt and he was a tax collector, so there was a lot of self-seeking there, and there was extortionism at that time. So that's a general. It doesn't say exactly about Zacchaeus, but it does say later on, if I had cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay 4 times the amount. So Christine is not sure if he's saying, did he owe to people? Did he cheat it? I have a feeling he did because that's what he's saying. That. So, but you can disagree, and we can have another take the challenge. Yeah, it seems like he had started to change in that meeting with Jesus. Now, let me go to some math here. So in the law, Old Testament, and we did a good revision there, a grateful heart gave a 10% of what they owed. What am I saying? What they receive, what they earn, the income, the 10%. I want to give it to you. And it was a vow, a promise from a grateful heart. Zacchaeus met Jesus, and we're not developing the story like in length today. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I had cheated anybody out of anything," this is an encounter, and his heart started to change. So after that, I'm sure he started making accounts of. "And I will pay 4 times the amount." So I broke this down, just this verse, in what this could mean. Again, don't quote me on this, please, because I'm not a scholar. But what he's saying, I think, is Zacchaeus' income was 100. What was the currency at the time? I never lend the money in the bank. Denarius. So Zacchaeus' income was 100 denarius. Let's make it extremely simple. So he said, he just stood up and says, "I'm giving 50, half of that, to the poor. If I cheated people, I'm gonna give them 40, 4 times more. You know, if I cheated 10, I'm gonna give them 40. And then Zacchaeus ended up giving 90 and keeping 10. Now, I can only see this through someone being transformed by the power of God. Listen, God, here's the reflection of, you know, I want to follow you. I'm so amazed by what you're doing here. I just want to give. I don't care about money anymore. I just hit the jackpot, you know. He met Jesus, and his money met Jesus. So I said, only a transformed heart can give like that. And what do I have next? I think that's the end of my. And you may wonder what else in the New Testament, because actually in there it doesn't say anything about tithe. And it doesn't say, and Zacchaeus started giving the tithe, you know. He just gave a lot more, but it doesn't use the word tithe. But if you want to know in your Bible, in Acts 4:36, people started selling properties and giving at the feet of the apostle, bring it to what was church, just giving it, putting it at the feet, the entire amount. And we know after that is a famous story of some people who sold the properties and gave a portion and said, "Yeah, this is all." Really? I'm not gonna go there, but that's because the heart, they wanted to copy a system, but the heart wasn't in it. So that's all I'm gonna say about Ananias and Sapphira. Just read it at home. It continues after that. And then Hebrews 7, 1-10 retells the story of Abraham in the Old Testament. And Hebrews retells a lot of stories from the Old Testament. It's one of the most beautiful books you can read, because it marries the Old Testament with the New Testament, and the old practices with the new practices. And tells the story how he gave the title Melchizedek and what it meant to us. Now, I had it written down and I left it at home, but my husband always encourages me and says, "You're a storyteller." So I will try my best. But this is a story, and I'm gonna finish with this story. So a guest speaker was invited to a small church. And this guest speaker was speaking, was sharing about tithing, and said, why don't you try God? Why don't you test God if this works? Why don't you test his character? If you give, you're gonna be in debt. If you give, what happens when you give? You know? And the pastor of the small church just talked to him afterwards and said, do you know what? I haven't given for a year. We had debts, we had things to cover, and we never had that money to give that portion, to give to God. And the speaker said, the guest speaker said, oh, okay, let me think about this. So why don't we take a challenge this next year? And you start giving to God 10%, if that's the amount you want to give. Start giving to God 10%, and if you struggle financially, if this is gonna get you into trouble, this speaker, you know, I cover the rest, all the needs, you know, that arise, the children's uniform, the food you wanted to have and you couldn't. I'll cover, and this is a deal for a year. Shall we? And says, yeah, but just only call me if you just, because you gave that money, you are out of pocket now. And so they did that agreement for a year. And at the end of the year, this pastor of a small church says, do you notice that I didn't have to call you for a whole year? I don't know how this happened. But every time we gave, and we gave as a priority to go, we're fine. We never had it. Somehow things came our way, money was enough. This doesn't make sense. And the guest pastor who did the deal with him said, oh, this is amazing. I always trusted God. What I don't understand, he said to the local pastor, the small church pastor, is why do you trust in me as a backup? Why do you think I was trustworthy to cover your debts more than God? And I don't know how the story continued. It's a true story. It's a true story. It's in my devotional book. But I guess that's what I want. If you remember anything out of this talk, is if someone said, if you give to God, but you're out of pocket, I will cover. I will cover. I just write the check. It's only, a text away. You just text me, I cover. And we'll be like, how would we feel? Relief, oh no, yeah, I can do this. What if he got saying, try me, put me to the test and see what happens? So I only standing here and saying this because we have done that. We have, needs or no, we never stop giving. And here we are, here we are. And we can testify of the goodness of God. So it's a matter of, would I trust God? Do you think that materially he can provide? Because we know he's faithful. But materially, how does that work? And I know if this brings you more questions than assurances, I like that position too, because you can ask. You can ask one of us, you can ask God as well. And that's the end of the talk and the story.